is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Paul Barber.
And I'm Juliette Mann. Our top stories. Nearing the finish line, President Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus package faces its final vote.
Cathay Pacific warns it's in survival mode as the airline reports a record annual loss.
A fresh row over vaccine nationalism erupts after Brussels accuses London of export bans.
Are green plans getting the green light? World climate experts assess whether countries are keeping their promises to build back better.
And building profits. Lego gets a boost from lockdown families playing together. A huge coronavirus stimulus package looks set to be approved in the United States. Joe Biden's American Rescue Act will provide $1.9 trillion of pandemic relief to U.S. citizens and local governments. It's expected to be voted through by the U.S. House of Representatives shortly. It cleared the Senate on Saturday. So, where is the money going? Well, the headline grabber is a one-off direct payment to most American adults, the so-called stimulus check. And it will be means tested with a top limit of $1,400. Weekly top-ups of up to $300 are being extended for people getting unemployment benefits. And there's an expansion of tax credits for children, with parents able to get up to $4,000 per child. An extra $350 billion in federal aid will be given to state and local governments, along with $70 billion to fund mass virus testing and vaccination programs. Well, let's talk to Jim Spellman in Maryland. Look, we've given you the bullet points there, but it's a very detailed plan. What did I miss?
Yeah, so there's also targeted relief for some hard-hit specific sectors of the U.S. economy. That would include airlines, restaurants, and small businesses. These are the kind of businesses that are not going to bounce back immediately, even when the country is entirely vaccinated. The whole way we work here is shifting. There's anticipation that many office workers will still work at home a couple of days a week, and there'll be far less business travel, so these industries are welcoming that targeted relief. The White House also pointing out it's not just those top numbers, but it's how wide the impact is. 85% of U.S. households are eligible for those $1,400 a person payments. And when you put together all of the things here that are listed, some families of four could be eligible for up to $12,800 of assistance in this calendar year from this. That will be life-changing for many families. And I think that's part of what you're going to hear from Joe Biden on Thursday night. He's set to make a primetime address marking the roughly one-year point of when much of the U.S. went into lockdown. Juliette?
Well, it's almost as long as 1 year, as you mentioned, that we've been talking about this stimulus package. So we know it's been in the pipeline. Is that why there hasn't been that much noise from Republicans?
Well, we don't expect any Republicans to vote for this in the House today, and no Republicans backed it in the Senate. But it's extremely popular with the American people. Some polling shows support for this bill at 75, even 83%, which is really unheard of in our very divided political atmosphere here in Washington. There's a big danger here for Republicans if they go up against this too much. The impacts of this are going to start really hitting just as the vaccines are having a larger impact. Could be a real boost to the economy, and they don't want to be on the wrong side of that. Plus, former President Donald Trump backed a similar law, so it's likely a lot of the base actually supports what's in this bill, even if they don't want to give Democrats credit for it. So we are hearing criticism from Republicans. They bring up worries about growing deficits. They say much of this has little to do with actually preventing COVID, and they say it's basically a liberal wish list. But at the end of the day, I don't think this is a hill Republicans want to die on. I think they'll try to find other issues to take on Joe Biden and the Democrats as we move throughout the year. Juliette?
Jim Spellman in D.C., thank you very much. We'll be back with you if that vote result comes through. Well, it's the second largest economic stimulus bill in U.S. history, and that's bound to cause ripples throughout global markets. So let's speak to Ryan Thompson, who's in Frankfurt. Hi there, Ryan. Now, I have to say, this stimulus package, it was really always in the mix. I would have thought that investors had factored that in. So what is happening on European markets?
Absolutely. It was a campaign promise of Joe Biden. You would have thought it would have been in the cards for a long time now, and these investment banks would have thought about it, but they seem equally surprised, and the markets are definitely responding to the near passage of this piece of legislation. Share prices are at their highest level since the start of the pandemic, and that couldn't be more true here in Frankfurt, where it's been another day of big gains. The DAX index up nearly 500 points since Monday, rallying on good financial news and the anticipation of these fresh stimulus funds. If you look at more European-wide indexes like the Euro Stoxx 600, it's up about 10 points since Monday. But if you look at the big picture of the whole year, it's been about 26% gain compared to the start of this crisis, nearly a full year ago when bad financial news was just at the onset. Now, many financial institutions are keeping their eyes on the ECB meeting tomorrow, where the Board of Governors as well as Christine Lagarde will meet. They'll be keeping an eye on those interest rates, and Christine Lagarde giving an update on the emergency bond buying program, which has slowed in recent weeks. And the question here is whether European banks will shed the stocks and go back to bonds.
OK, so this US stimulus package, a keen eye on what European Central Bank is going to do in terms of interest rates. Anything else that's playing into what we're seeing on European markets?
Well, despite these looming questions about interest rates down the line, there's a lot of positive indications that are giving investors good news to hedge their bets. Notably, the U.S. tech stocks up for the second day in a row yesterday, inspiring some confidence here on European markets. Not to mention the European vaccination passport program moving ahead, really upping those hospitality stocks for people thinking that there may be a return to travel on the European continent in the days to come. Not to mention positive earning reports being released today. Adidas saying that they have a 5-year plan to take on Nike, and Zara owner Inditex riding on an e-commerce boom that despite many of their stores being shut for these past weeks and months, they saw a pretty good turnout in 2020.
A lot to get our teeth into. Ryan Thompson, thank you very much.
Prices for China's manufactured goods are continuing to climb. Last month saw growth reach its fastest rate for 2 years. The Producer Price Index measures the costs of goods as they leave factories. It's being driven upwards by domestic demand. Consumer spending, though, shrank by 3.9% from a year ago. The fallout from the interview with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex continues, now hitting the London Stock Exchange. British TV host Piers Morgan has quit his role after making controversial comments about Meghan Markle. Shares in his former employer, ITV, are down 6%. And Adidas has reported a return to sales growth in the final quarter of last year. The German sportswear firm says a rise in e-commerce helped offset the impact of lockdown store closures. All markets outside Europe posted growth in the quarter. Cathay Pacific has warned it's still in survival mode after reporting a record $2.8 billion loss for last year. The disruption to global air travel has forced the carrier to ground almost half its fleet. From Hong Kong, Richard Kimber reports.
The chairman of Cathay Pacific says that the 12 months of 2020 were the toughest in the more than 70 years that the airline has been operating. Just glancing at the standout numbers in its financial report, and it's easy to understand why. Almost $3 billion in net losses, that's worse than analysts were expecting. Passenger numbers down more than 80% on 2019, and during its worst day of passenger traffic during the course of 2020, only 100 passengers flying on the airline's planes. So many planes still grounded, and a share price that was down more than a third across the 12-month period. There are many cost-saving measures still in place. There's an extended unpaid leave option being offered to staff globally that the airline says 80% of employees have already agreed to. There's also executive pay cuts taking place across 2021. But having already received a near $5 billion bailout from the Hong Kong government, and having already made job cuts of around 6,000 positions, many of which are here in Hong Kong. It's not easy, analysts say, to see how the airline can make radical restructuring changes during what is already a very difficult time for understanding how and when the airline industry may recover. So much now riding on COVID-19 vaccine rollout. The airline says that it's still expecting a recovery perhaps in 2022 through to 2024, but during the rest of this year it's expecting operating capacity will continue to remain below 50%, making it struggling even with the history of Hong Kong as such a rich and global aviation hub, still looking uncertain for the coming months ahead. Richard Kimber for CGTN in Hong Kong.
Well, Cathay Pacific is far from alone. Airlines everywhere have been struggling. I spoke to Alexandre de Juniac, who's the outgoing Director General of the International Air Transport Association, about the current state of the industry.
So the industry is still in a difficult situation. By the end of 2020, we had hopes, following various announcements on the vaccine, on the testing. But with the surge of the variants, many states have closed their borders again, or they have issued some travel restriction again in January. So the traffic has dropped. Even in the Chinese domestic market, the traffic has been slow. So we have postponed our estimate, and we now forecast the beginning of a recovery by mid-2021. And in the meantime, we have still to survive. We will burn cash, and we still need government support.
You've said that 2021 started off worse than 2020 ended. Do people want to get back to travel, or will that spectre of quarantine be a deal breaker?
So it is absolutely sure that the appetite to flight is still there. We have seen that, for instance, in China by the end of 2020, where the traffic, reached almost the figures of 2019. We have seen that when we have reopened corridors between, for instance, the UK and the Canary Islands, bookings have surged. So the appetite to fly is there. But undoubtedly, travel restrictions such as border closure or quarantine are a major deterrent to travel.
So let's talk about how to fix it. Quarantine passports. Some governments are up for it, but many others really aren't. To create a new kind of ecosystem, doesn't everyone have to be on board?
Of course, if we want travel to restart, not only the airlines have to be ready, not only the passengers have to maintain their appetite to fly, but governments have to agree to welcome passengers, so to reopen their borders and to lift travel restrictions, that's for sure. And then we can bring on the table a tool, which is a digital tool that can be used as a kind of health or vaccination or testing certificate that the passengers could use to justify that they have done everything complying with the requirements that have been issued by each state in which they want to travel to.
So there's a medical side to it, but you're also talking about smart tech and AI playing a key role.
Yes, we think that if there is or if there are travel requirements in terms of vaccination or testing, to certify that you have gone through properly these requirements, you must show something. Before, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, we were relying on paper. You had the famous yellow passport for the yellow fever, if you remember. Mm-hmm. Now we think that the digital tool is absolutely key. And so we are developing an app that you will be able to download on your smartphone, and in which you will be able to put your medical certification of vaccination and testing and transfer this data to the airline or the state which is requiring such information to allow you to enter. So we think it's a key element to reopen borders.
Still ahead here on CGTN, a new variant brings a new threat. Scientists sound a warning on one of the recent mutations of the coronavirus.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Don't forget you can sign up to our daily newsletter. We bring you all the top business headlines straight to your inbox. So sign up for free at this address. CGTN. See the difference.
Hi there, welcome back to Global Business Europe. China's top political advisers have wrapped up nearly a week of deliberations on the proposals that cover everything from the economy to legal reform. Dong Shui has the details.
At the closing session of the 13th CPPCC National Committee, Chairman Wang Yang said the body has fulfilled its duties this year by pursuing unity, democracy, and building consensus. He said the CPPCC has served to propel and improve people's well-being and advance social progress in China. Wang Yang made the remarks in a speech to about 2,000 national policy advisors at the close of the meeting. President Xi Jinping and other Chinese leaders were in attendance.
We as political advisors must make better use of the inclusiveness and diversity of the CPPCC to help promote government policies and let more people benefit from them. We must help build consensus in terms of developing the economy and forming new growth patterns. We'll do our part in building a modern socialist China.
As the 100th year since the founding of the Communist Party of China and the beginning of China's 14th five-year plan, Wang Yang said the CPPCC will strive to maintain political integrity through 2021. He added the body will work hard to continue building a moderately prosperous society in all respects. And he said the CPPCC will fulfill its dual responsibility by offering suggestions and building consensus. Apart from calling for a stronger role for the CPPCC in strengthening ties between political advisors and the people, Wang Yang also called for the body to play a key part in overseeing and implementing the 14th five-year plan. It's hoped these will increase opportunities for foreign investors across different sectors and drive China's growth for the next 5 years. Dong Xue, CGTN, Beijing.
It's a relationship that's never been more important. Trade between China and Central and Eastern European countries passed $100 billion for the first time in 2020. CGTN's Zhang Nini spoke to China's ambassador to Hungary, Xi Jiahu, about the relationship and what it means for both sides.
2020, due to COVID-19, the world economy showed a downward trend, but the economy between China and Hungary is bucking that trend, with Hungary being the destination of investment for 10 Chinese companies. As of 2020, China's cumulative investment in Hungary has exceeded $5.5 billion, accounting for half of China's investment in the entire Central and Eastern European countries. Hungary has continued to be the destination for the largest Chinese investment in the region. Good bilateral relations, Hungary's favourable investment environment, high-quality labour force, superior geographical location, relatively complete logistics and infrastructure are among favourable factors for attracting Chinese investment. In recent years, under the strategic guidance of the leaders of China and Hungary, the comprehensive strategic partnership between China and Hungary has been continuously upgraded and political trust been strengthened. Hungary's eastward opening is connected with China's Belt and Road Initiative. Bilateral relations has entered the best period in history.
A diplomatic row has erupted between the EU and the UK over the export of COVID vaccines. Britain says a claim made by European Council President Charles Michel that the UK has imposed an export ban on the jabs is false. Our correspondent Tony Waterman joins us now from Brussels. So, Tony, there was a meeting between European and British foreign ministry officials in London. Do we know what was said?
But we haven't received a readout of that closed-door meeting. And in fact, the Commission says that it's not going to comment because this is what diplomats do on a day-to-day basis. Now, we know that's not necessarily true because when envoys are summoned, it's usually because there is a major rift in the relationship. And these accusations from Charles Michel that the UK and the US have these outright bans on the export of vaccines and vaccine components would seem to fit that bill. But with even without this readout, it's pretty safe to say that Brussels got perhaps a bit of a dressing down in this meeting earlier today. So this letter that Charles Michel sent out yesterday afternoon, it was really about trying to defend the EU's role when it comes to vaccine development and vaccine exports. And it's always claimed that it is really an exporting superhouse, a powerhouse when it comes to COVID vaccines. And a New York Times article this morning cited some previously undisclosed numbers around EU exports of the vaccine, saying that 25 million doses were sent abroad in the month of February, even with the new export control mechanism in place, which forces companies to seek approval before they can ship those abroad. Now, it's unclear how much vaccines are imported into the EU from the UK or how much the UK actually ships abroad. There were reports today saying that number is pretty close to zero. But Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, waded into this growing clash between the two, saying that the claim, rather, that there is an export ban in place is simply not true. Take a listen.
I therefore wish to correct the suggestion from the European Council President that the UK has blocked vaccine exports. Let me be clear, we have not blocked the export of a single COVID-19 vaccine or vaccine components. This pandemic has put us all on the same side in the battle for global health. We oppose vaccine nationalism in all its forms.
Tony, Europe has been criticised for the speed of its vaccine rollout. Are we seeing any signs of improvement?
Well, little by little, more and more people are getting vaccinated every day, and more doses are going to help. And in fact, the Commission announced today that it has reached another deal with Pfizer-BioNTech for an additional 4 million doses of their vaccine to be delivered by the end of this month. Those are vaccines that are going to be distributed in a very targeted manner. They're going to be spent to border regions where there are hotspots of the variants in particular taking place. And also they're meant to help facilitate cross-border movements. In some places, we've seen that borders have been sealed because of the coronavirus. Now, BioNTech says that they've made some efficiencies in their production process to allot for this 4 million additional doses, and it's not going to be taken from any doses that were expected in the second quarter of this year. We're also expecting that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is going to be approved by the European drugs regulator tomorrow. That should bring in some new supplies, although it's unclear right now whether Johnson & Johnson is actually going to be able to meet expectations on deliveries. The EU had previously asked the U.S. for a loan of 10 million of these Johnson & Johnson doses, which they were denied that request. So as more and more vaccines come online, the hope is that these immunization programs can pick up across the block. 300 million doses are expected in the second quarter of this year. The question now becomes whether or not the member states have the proper infrastructure in place to be able to handle this flood of vaccines.
Tony Waterman in Brussels, many thanks.
Meanwhile, scientists say research is indicating that the COVID-19 variant first identified in the UK may be much deadlier than previously thought. It follows a highly critical report by a UK parliamentary spending watchdog that the $52 billion track and trace system has made little difference in the fight against the pandemic. Nicole Johnston reports.
At the end of last year, a more infectious COVID-19 variant, first identified in the UK, started spreading rapidly, leading to another national lockdown. Now scientists from the universities of Exeter and Bristol say this variant may be between 30 and 100% more deadly. The B.1.1.7 variant, first identified in the UK, is now the dominant strain in this country, and leading British scientists expect it will sweep across the world.
The NHS COVID-19 app is the...
Meanwhile, the British government is under fire for its COVID-19 test and trace system. Last year, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson promised it would be top-notch.
We have a growing confidence that we will have a test, track and trace operation that will be world-beating.
Instead, a parliamentary committee says there's been no clear impact from test and trace and described the level of spending on it as unimaginable. The government has spent $51 billion, hiring 12,000 contact tracers, setting up a phone app and PCR testing labs across the country. Still, the government has defended it.
1.5 million tests been done yesterday, and the team have built this testing capacity from nothing a year ago, and so they've done an amazing job, and I'm incredibly grateful to them.
The Public Accounts Committee said there's no evidence of the scheme's overall effectiveness.
With a more infectious and deadly strain of COVID-19 in the UK and a test and trace system that some regard as not fit for purpose, the positive news is that every day more people are being vaccinated. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
The latest figures from the World Health Organization show that up to a fifth of people who catch COVID-19 still have the symptoms 4 weeks later, and 1 in 10 still have them after 12 weeks. On our website, we're asking, should I worry about long COVID? What are the symptoms and how serious can they be? Europe.cgtn.com.
Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all major digital platforms, on smart TV or online, on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well as, of course, at cgtn.com and on the CGTN app.
Still to come on the programme, we're in Paris, where the health system is close to collapse. We'll find out just what went wrong. Coming up.
Patient after patient after patient. They take a long time to get better. They're the sickest patients we've ever seen.
It's a race against time, because we can all see the threat that our NHS faces, the pressure it's under.
We're dealing with something we knew very little about.
Europe's first 2 epicentres in February have received their first dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine.
Another day, another grim milestone for the UK in its fight against COVID-19. 100,000 people have now lost their lives after contracting the virus.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliette Mann and me, Paul Barber. The headlines again. Nearing the finish line, President Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus package faces its final vote.
Cathay Pacific warns it's in survival mode as the airline reports a record annual loss.
A fresh row over vaccine nationalism erupts after Brussels accuses London of export bans.
Health officials in France have warned the number of COVID patients in the intensive care unit is at the highest level since the end of November. In the Paris region alone, almost 1,000 people are in ICU. And as Ross Cullen reports, it's a similar situation in many parts of Europe.
The number of patients in intensive care in France is at its highest since November last year. But the number of people vaccinated remains low compared with France's neighbours. The EU wants to build vaccine capacity and is hoping to boost the number of doses, with the incoming Johnson & Johnson shots set to get the green light shortly.
I don't want to anticipate, but I have the feeling that EMA will give authorization within the next, hopefully, days or hours, which is a very good news, because then we will have 4 vaccines ready to go.
The French government has said time and again how it wants to accelerate its COVID-19 vaccination programme, but cases and deaths remain high. A nationwide curfew has been in place for 3 months now, and weekend lockdowns are being imposed in some areas. In Paris, the recent early spring sunshine has seen thousands flock to parks and outdoor spaces. The high numbers forcing police to close the paths along the banks of the River Seine.
The total percentage of people vaccinated in France is not yet sufficient to reduce the number of people in intensive care. Other countries have a higher percentage of vaccinated people with a decrease of the pressure on hospitals. But let's not forget that those countries simultaneously applied a lockdown, so the impact they are seeing is due to a mix of those two factors.
The number of COVID-19 patients in intensive care in the Paris capital region has now passed the 1,000 mark, with almost all available urgent care beds in use. Across the EU, governments are trying to manage hospitals at full capacity, like here in this medical facility in Italy. There are also the stubbornly high case numbers and vaccination programmes running at a pace far below that of the UK, the US and Israel. The Czech Republic tops the world statistics for coronavirus cases per capita over the past 2 weeks. But even under the strain of rocketing infection rates, a 4-star hotel in the capital, Prague, has opened its doors to accommodate homeless people with COVID-19. It's a small ray of light during a European spring that has so far not shown the green shoots of economic recovery and renewal that many had hoped for, as the health situation remains critical. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Madrid's Conservative regional leader Isabel Ayuso has unexpectedly quit, triggering a snap election. For more, Rahul Pathak joins us from the Spanish capital now. So, Rahul, a dramatic day for regional politics, something no one expected this morning.
Yeah, Paul, fair to say no one did expect that this morning, and not just dramatic for regional politics, but for Spain as a whole, because what happens here in Madrid has a huge knock-on effect around the rest of the country, especially in its ongoing battle against the coronavirus pandemic. Now, Isabel Ayuso's right-wing PP party has been in a coalition with the centrist Ciudadanos, or Citizens Party, since 2019, and in recent months that relationship has really soured. In fact, it's pretty much just broken down, so both parties have really struggled to work with each other, which is not ideal when you're trying to fight a global pandemic. Ayuso clearly decided enough was enough and decided a few hours ago, and building behind me, decided to announce snap elections for May the 4th. She's clearly hoping for a stronger mandate from the Madrid electorate so she can pursue her policies in terms of fighting that pandemic and the other issues that are affecting the Madrid region, Paul.
And Rahul, today also saw more protests in the capital against the regional government, with primary care doctors in the street.
Yeah, this has been a running theme throughout the Ayuso presidency, her battle with healthcare professionals, as you said. it's something that's been brought to even sharper focus because of the pandemic. And as you correctly said, we're at a protest today just down the road with primary healthcare doctors announcing that they were going on indefinite strike. They were complaining that not enough doctors are being hired. They claim there's a shortfall of 650 GPs just in the Madrid region alone, GPs that have retired or who have just left the profession. And they said that last year, Ayuso's administration just hired 29 GPs in all of 2020, in the middle of the greatest health crisis this country has seen in more than a century. We've also seen protests from nurses who claimed at the beginning of the pandemic that they weren't being given enough PPE supplies to fight the virus safely, and also there's been a lack of job security on their side. A lot of people are not being offered staff jobs, they're just being offered short-term contracts of 1 or 2 months, and they're saying that's very difficult to deal with. Ayuso would say that her administration has spent money on healthcare here, the $100 million spent on the new pandemic hospital being one case in point, and another big plus point for her was the opening up of the Wanda Metropolitano football stadium as a mass vaccination centre, showing that she was caring about healthcare in her political agenda. Paul.
So how significant are these developments for Madrid and for Spain?
Hugely significant. I mean, the regional government are in charge of health policy here, the coronavirus response, and of course the vaccine rollout. Ayuso's right-wing administration has often clashed severely with the socialist central government of Pedro Sanchez. Both clearly have very different ideas on how to fight the pandemic. The socialists believe in stricter regulations, more lockdowns, more curfews. Madrid completely the opposite. Ayuso's administration very much focused on helping the economy in the aftermath of the pandemic. So local bars, restaurants, hair salons, shops all remain open. The streets really, really busy, even as Madrid has one of the highest infection rates, not only in the country, but in Europe. So the central government of Pedro Sanchez will be hoping that in the forthcoming elections, maybe whoever wins that election, they'll be able to work better with them. Hopefully for them, the Socialist Party will do quite well. But there's also a very strong possibility Ayuso could win with a stronger majority, or that she might have to work with the very far right-wing Vox party. Remember, they did really well in the recent Catalan elections, and if Vox, the right-wing Vox party, hold the balance of power here in Madrid, that would represent a real nightmare scenario for Pedro Sanchez and his socialist government. Paul.
OK, Rahul, thanks very much for that update. Rahul Pathak in Madrid.
Are we building back better? That's the question a group of international climate experts asked on Wednesday at a UN-hosted conference. A crisis like the pandemic presents an opportunity for change in priorities. Let's take a look at how different countries say they plan to stage a green recovery. Well, in the recent budget, the UK pledged more cash for low-carbon projects and announced a new green savings bond scheme. Prime Minister Boris Johnson had previously outlined a plan to create green jobs. The European Union earmarked 37% of its recovery fund for spending on climate measures. There are plans to help countries like Poland, whose economy is reliant on coal, to help them transition to greener energy. And of course, as the world's biggest polluters, all eyes are on China and the United States to see what path they will chart. President Joe Biden's stimulus plan contains promises to support green jobs, but a full economic recovery plan will be made clear later in the year. Last year, China pledged that its CO2 emissions will peak by 2030 and say it will soon release full details on how this is going to be achieved. But of course, words are very different to actions. To talk more about whether all these pledges are likely to happen, we can speak to Brian O'Callaghan, who's lead researcher at the Oxford University Economic Recovery Project. Thanks ever so much for joining us. So, building back better, who is walking the walk as well as talking the talk?
Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction, and it's great to be with you this afternoon. Yes, so our project, Oxford University, in partnership with the United Nations and the IMF, as well as GIZ from Germany, has been looking to understand which countries are building back better and which are still falling short. So far, we see that of recovery spending is that which is intended to reinvigorate an economy. 18% has been directed to green initiatives. Now, there's pretty significant deviation between countries. You have some like Denmark up near 60%, whereas others like Australia down near 2%. So quite a bit of deviation, overall 18% or so.
I want to talk about that 18%. I mean, that seems quite low. I appreciate it's an average. What is holding governments back?
Right, and it is rather confounding. What has been demonstrated over the past year in various academic circles is that the idea that green spending is bad for the economy is just complete rubbish, to be honest. Academic work has demonstrated that you can spend on green initiatives that match and in many cases actually exceed the economic impacts of traditional and especially dirty alternatives. So there's a real economic impetus for this green spending. Even if you don't believe in climate change, it just seems to make economic sense. Then there are also the various social benefits that can come from green spending and, of course, the environmental benefits. So it's the question, why aren't we seeing governments do as much as they should be? A lot of it comes down to transparency. Governments are doing a really good job of bringing attention to their green programs, but not necessarily putting them in context with their other programs. So the Global Recovery Observatory, which is launched today, allows taxpayers around the world to understand really just how much is going to green projects and how much isn't.
So that they can do the numbers. So look, you're saying it makes business sense, you're saying it makes social sense. So to keep things sustainable and equitable, what would your checklist be?
Right. So we have developed a rather robust 100-page methodology designed to help governments understand what type of initiatives do have positive environmental characteristics. And then on the social side, the devil is really in the detail. A policy, say, for example, a green home retrofit policy, of which the UK has recently introduced one, that can have very positive social impacts if directed towards low-income households. However, if those types of direction and incentive aren't there, it can actually support the status quo of high inequality. Because, of course, in the case of a home efficiency retrofit, those who have a lot of money already are going to be more likely to have their new retrofit, on the cards and ready to go. So on the environmental side, we have a detailed methodology to help governments understand. Really, you're looking for projects that reduce future greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, in the short term, infrastructure projects often have negative greenhouse gas emissions, even the green ones. But in the long term, what you're talking about is substituting dirty energy projects like coal and gas with clean alternatives. And in that way, you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the long term. So then there's also biodiversity impacts and air pollution impacts, which we also try to target. And in particular, in China, for your Chinese audience, the air pollution impacts are really a central part of the discussion.
So a very long checklist. Well, Brian Callaghan, thank you very much for giving us some pointers on what governments could do to be cleaner and greener. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, China's two sessions have seen the announcement of new pathways to carbon neutrality by 2060 without inhibiting growth. Isabel Hilton is CEO of China Dialogue, an independent organisation that promotes a common understanding of China's environmental challenges. I asked her about her takeaways from the two sessions.
I think people were also quite pleased that there wasn't a GDP target this time, because GDP targets tend to encourage carbon-heavy projects. Pouring concrete gets you your GDP, but it's not good for the planet, and it's probably not good for the economy. So it's quite welcome that there isn't a fixed target that people will have to aim at. I guess people were a little disappointed that the energy intensity targets was not quite as vigorous as Tsinghua, for example, had recommended. So there's room to tighten up here, I think.
And what kind of opportunities do you see in the longer term for green technology exchange and sharing between China and Europe? And how close is carbon capture and storage to becoming a reality?
Carbon capture is not technically difficult. In fact, it's practiced in oil extraction quite routinely. What's difficult is making it economic. And actually finding suitable geologies on a very large scale, because you have to find somewhere that you can get the carbon to, which may not be where you're actually capturing it, and where it has to remain safely. And that's a relatively complicated proposition, and certainly not a cheap one. So it may just be that it never fits, any kind of market proposition. But there are many other things, I think, that we can look to for quite radical improvements. Things like the hydrogen economy. How do you power heavy industry without carbon-heavy fuel? And hydrogen seems quite popular there. Batteries have a huge amount of potential improvement before they're really exciting, but they're coming along very fast. So again, China and the European Union are each other's really important markets. And if we can get the policy in alignment and get the rules in alignment, I think that there's tremendous potential there.
Isabel Hilton speaking to me there. Protesters in Myanmar say security forces fired live ammunition at them in the largest city, Yangon. This video shows people running past a barricade with a group of them carrying an injured man. More than 60 protesters have been killed and nearly 2,000 people have been arrested since the military takeover last month.
If I can sum it up in 3 words, it is grim, it is horrifying, and it is heartbreaking. Protesters as well as journalists are going out every single day wondering whether this is the last day that they're going to be doing their job, whether it's protesting or reporting or informing the rest of the world what's happening in the media. And I really fear that things will get worse before they get better.
All this as Myanmar's military regime recalls its ambassador to the UK. That's after he voiced his opposition to last month's takeover and issued a statement demanding the release of the deposed leader, Aung San Suu Kyi. Well, Andrew Wilson's been following all of these developments. He joins us now. Hi there, Andrew. So an ambassador openly challenging the takeover. How much is a problem? Is that a problem for the military leaders?
It's hard to tell if it'll actually have any effect. I mean, this ambassador has now been withdrawn from London, a post he's held now for over 7 years. So he's a well-established member of the diplomatic corps. He's also a colonel, a former colonel in the armed forces, and also an Aung San Suu Kyi appointment himself. So his loyalties are clearly, if you like, if put to the test, perhaps divided. He's a member of the military, so he sees life through the same sort of lens as the military leaders now who have taken over government control of Myanmar, but also he is loyal to his leader, which is Aung San Suu Kyi, and so he's called for her release and also the release of Win Myint, the president of Myanmar. He says this is not a political comment. He says he's trying to occupy the middle ground. He doesn't like the violence. He's not happy with what's going on in the streets of the 3 major cities in Myanmar and beyond that into some of the rural regions as well, and he says this has to stop. So that in itself might not be a huge upset to the military leaders at the moment. But bear in mind, this has a lot of echoes of 2007, the so-called Saffron Revolution then, when the demonstrations and riots and tear gas and some live ammunition were fired for quite a consistent amount of time to huge international condemnation, with teachers and lawyers and students, bank clerks and government workers all taking to the streets. That's very much the same situation they have now, but more pictures are coming out. It's a more public event, and more parts of the world are getting a closer look on what exactly is going on, and that makes the military leaders perhaps a little more vulnerable. It's been, 6 weeks now, 54 people recorded as having died. That number may well be higher than that. So in isolation, perhaps the ambassador's comments wouldn't be damaging, but there is an added element to that, and that is that the embassy, or at least the embassy in Washington as well, has voiced its concern and called for the violence to stop. So that is another member of the diplomatic corps. And there are also reports from inside Myanmar, in fact from India, just outside the country's borders, that in small groups, just groups of 1 or 2, some of the police officers are fleeing from Myanmar because they're not happy about being ordered to open fire on protesters. They're not happy on being ordered to control people, some of whom they regard as their friends. Americans, and so those stories are getting quite a lot of publicity, even though they are anecdotal at this stage. But if you add all that together with reports also, again, anecdotal only, but doing the rounds, that government officials are thinking of leaving their positions and taking up with the civil disobedience movement that's become known, well, that's an element of mutiny that may have a certain critical momentum, which may make life slightly harder for the military leaders. So there may be yet some concerns. There's no direct communication between the embassy and the military, but nonetheless that call has gone out for Colonel Min to be brought back, and I understand he is going to go back to Myanmar. He says he's not going to sort this out either in New York or in London. He needs to do it at home.
Andrew Wilson, thank you for the update.
This is CGTN. Still ahead. China steps up efforts to inoculate senior citizens as its vaccination drive continues.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
NPC and CPPCC, China's biggest annual political gathering of lawmakers and political advisors. As the world's second largest economy recovers from the pandemic, it chalks out plans for the coming year and beyond. With new proposals, laws, and targets, CGTN brings you unmatched coverage of the meetings that matter. Exclusive interviews, people's voices, in-depth analysis, and the impact on the rest of the world. China's 2 sessions begins March 4th. Live and exclusive on CGTN.
Welcome back. Health systems in most of Brazil's largest cities are close to collapse due to COVID-19 cases. The country's leading health institute warns. It says more than 80% of intensive care unit beds are occupied in the capitals of 25 of Brazil's 27 states. Hawaii has declared an emergency after flooding and landslides prompted the US state to issue evacuation orders. Several thousand people have had to be moved after heavy rain caused the dam to overflow on the island of Maui. At least one person is thought to have died in the extreme weather, with flood advisories remaining in place. A British police officer has been arrested on suspicion of murder over the disappearance of a woman in London. Extensive investigation is underway to try and find Sarah Everard, who was last seen on the 3rd of March. The arrested officer has not been identified, but police say he's in his 40s and was deployed to guard diplomatic buildings. A woman has also been arrested.
In China, the pandemic might be under control, but the vaccination rollout continues. In Beijing, people aged over 60 years old are receiving their first jabs. CGTN's Huang Yue reports.
A temporary COVID-19 vaccination site in Xicheng district of Beijing welcomed its oldest recipient on Tuesday morning. 93-year-old Gao Junjie says she immediately registered after received a phone call from her community.
I feel very lucky that I can be part of the vaccination program. I'll feel more at ease after getting the vaccine. I'm in very good health and an optimistic person. I believe in modern medicine.
Beijing kicked off its COVID-19 vaccination program early this year with high-risk individuals. The first stage finished before the Lunar New Year. And now, mass vaccination is underway for the general public in all 16 districts of Beijing.
On February the 8th, we started to inoculate people aged between 18 and 59. And on March the 6th, we expanded the coverage to people aged above 60.
Medical workers are more careful with the senior recipients as they might have underlying conditions. Before getting the jab, doctors ask about their health conditions, such as blood pressure and blood sugar levels, to assess whether or not they can be inoculated. Each temporary vaccination site has an emergency doctor station like this one, in case recipients have any adverse side effects.
If the recipients feel chest pain, we can perform an ECG here. This is an oxygen generator. We can give them oxygen if they need. We even have a defibrillator here.
The doctor says so far, no one at the site has shown severe adverse side effects, so none of the equipment has been used.
We have also prepared some medication here, including blood pressure pills and medicine to treat angina, arrhythmia, and allergies, in case someone might need it.
At an online forum attended by healthcare experts from both China and the U.S. earlier this month, leading Chinese respiratory expert Zhou Nanshan said China has inoculated nearly 3.5% of its population so far and plans to vaccinate 40% of people by the end of June. Huang Yue, CGTN, Beijing.
Lockdowns have forced families to find creative ways to entertain their children, whether that's screens, books or Lego. The Danish toy maker has reported a 21% surge in consumer sales in 2020. The company's CEO, Niels Christiansen, told CGTN what role China is playing in the company's growth.
China is, of course, kind of our spearhead investment area in some of that. I talked to the flagship store on Tmall, but really putting in the entire digital foundation in our company and being able to play on different platforms, really connecting with consumers and linking the entire Lego ecosystem together in a much stronger way. We see some great opportunities for that, and are really investing in China to spearhead and also to some degree use China to model how we want the entire Lego group also globally over the next decade to really take the lead on digital and go through a fundamental digital transformation of the group as such. The China government's ambition of growing the Chinese market also on the long horizon, I think, fits very well with the Lego Group's horizon and ambition in China. So I'm quite happy to see that. I also say that some of the improvements we've seen around how businesses can actually do business, the rights of IPR rights, IP rights. I think we've seen some positive things that makes it even more interesting for a brand like Lego to continue investing heavily in China.
And finally, the world of fashion has redefined the model plane. No superglue, no splinters, and no instructions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. Finding a use for grounded aircraft, Belmar models strode across the wing of a Boeing 777 to display the fall-winter 2021 collection. They also took to a runway of a different kind to show off the work of the French designer Olivier Rousteing. Filmed at Paris's Charles de Gaulle Airport, the collection looks forward to and is inspired by a world filled with travel again. Emphasising the escapism of travel, it features neck pillow earrings and handbags, along with paper plane suitcase charms. That's Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We are available to watch on smart TV apps like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. You can also find us on YouTube and Dailymotion, as well, of course, at cgtn.com and on the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.